I'm Jim Czek with Now Media, and we got the whole gang together.
I'm Renee Merrifield.
And I'm Ian Burns.
There you go. We got a big show here. So we're going to start in British Columbia. We're going to kick it off in British Columbia. Dan Elvis, our local MP, got that approved. They're going to do an inquiry into the BC Ferry deal. So that got passed. So there's hopefully some accountability there.
Absolutely. Jim, you and I talked about this last week. The opposition tends to have a better opportunity for debates and audits in Parliament than they do in the Legislative Assembly. So this was a huge move for Dan Albus and a very successful one. And I think that one that was probably supported by the Liberals, because I think that they don't want to wear this decision any more than what the Conservatives do. So I think this is going to be huge, and I think that the NDP should be on notice right now for what this looks like for them.
That mind your own business comment by Premier Eby, not looking good right now. It doesn't look like that's going to age very well.
No, I think it's pretty damaging, and I don't think that. He's going to end up looking positive in this whole thing. I think that Canadians are going to look at it with a lot more scrutiny, and I think that those in British Columbia, hopefully will take note and continue to take note, and that this won't just die with the summer sun.
Rob Shaw there asked the question. We played that this morning. Asked the question of the Premier as to why they went ahead with the Chinese thing. And then I think Ian had some not very flattering remarks for David Eby's response there. If you want to share that, Ian.
No, I just think he's obviously there's an art to it, isn't there? There's a finesse to political speaking, and you don't expect perfection, moral perfection from these people. They're very sort of compromised in many ways. They hold together a big coalition. They've got to try and avoid alienating people. So give politicians a certain amount of slack. But I just think his performances lately have been very cheap and just low grade, very poor, very easy to dissect. And lots of self-inflicted wounds as well. He keeps talking about, no Canadian company bid. That, like I said to Jim earlier, I sort of hear that as it's like an insult to my intelligence, and I assume everybody else listening to that. You've got to know that a Canadian company is not going to come up with a bid if they're going up against the Chinese Communist Party. Nobody can win that bid. Nobody on earth can win that bid. So I just feel a lot of little things like that, and then talking about the new fees, like they get all their ferries, but we don't get any help with our ferries. Lots of non sequiturs. And then the other week, he was going on about how far right the BC Conservatives are, and that just very peculiar language from a man that seems rattled. I think I don't think he's in a good place, politically at least. I think he gives me the impression of somebody who's on edge a bit, and he's sort of lashing out.
Well, it was interesting. The polls came out just a week ago, and he's losing in the polls. So that's significant, considering I don't think that John Rustad has been particularly strong. I think that certain individuals in his caucus have been strong throughout the spring session, but John certainly was not a shining bright light or a star in the whole spectrum here. And if anything, I'd say I read more articles about the tumult in the BC Conservative House as much as I do about them really taking on an initiative and really tackling it all the way through. So to say that, right now, British Columbians are favoring that tumult that's present in the BC Conservatives over what's being offered from the NDP, I think is really, really scary. And if David Eby isn't scared right now, then he's naive, which I don't think he is in any way, shape, or form. He can't win. And, I think you're right, Ian. I don't think that, he can actually, he's not finding a lot of favor in the media right now. He's not getting a lot of pickup on his lines. He's not getting a lot of, yeah, that's right, mind your own business, Canada. It's more like, what are you saying? And why would you say that? And no, actually, we would like for an audit to be done. And we want to know what's going on and an inquiry. We want to know how this decision was made. So I agree. I think he's looking very weak right now, but I think it's warranted. I think that the general public have not been happy with the NDP performance since they've come into power. And if anything, the prediction from John Rustad is that EB is not going to actually have a fall session, and instead might actually suffer through a confidence vote of his own caucus and party. If that happens, we're going to see some big upheaval in government before we see another session take place.
Yeah, kudos to Dan Elvis there for pushing that through, and it is a good sign that the committee is no longer protected, or the Liberals are no longer protected by the NDP. So with the bloc there, and with the Conservatives, the Liberals need to convince some of them to kibosh these inquiries now that were so readily kiboshed in the previous government.
Well, and again, I mean, this is where Chrystia Freeland basically, her letter, please reconsider before you award this $4 billion contract. I don't even think that there would be friends or enemies on the Liberal side. I don't even think that the Conservatives needed to be propped up at this point. I think everyone was probably in unison on an inquiry and figuring out how this decision was made.
We did get an email in from one of our readers saying, oh, this is a waste of time, these committee hearings, because no BC company bid. But I think a lot of people miss the point. It's very hard for a BC company to bid against the Chinese Communist government that gets, Harman points it out, Harman Bangu, the MLA, points it out that they use slave labor. I don't know if I'd use those terms, but they have tons of human rights violations on their labor. They don't have an industrial carbon tax, and they use inferior steel.
I think the other point is that we don't know what the RFP said, right? When a company tenders, they tender based on the criteria that's offered by government. I think that one of the things I'd like this inquiry to expose is what those terms were. Because if there were no terms with, about human rights, if there were no terms about the quality of steel, if there were no terms about those particular issues, Jim, you're right. There, why would a Canadian company bid against that beast? I think the other thing is, though, if there is nothing that actually says, a certain amount of the economic benefit needs to go to British Columbians or needs to go to Canadians, that also would be an issue that I would see in an RFP of this magnitude and coming from government.
If I remember correctly, I believe C-SPAN said that the contract for the bid was cost was the biggest priority in there, and they're just like, okay, so no then, right? It's because they know they can't compete with that type of stuff. Harman Bangu has been on this. You and I talked about it last time. He's been on this BC Ferry thing. We have him actually in tomorrow at 10:30. We're going to ask him some questions, so that's great of him to make himself available, because he's been on this one really well, just like Eleanor Sturko was on the drug one. So a couple of Conservative MLAs doing the hard work out there.
Yeah, and I said it last week. I'll say it again. These are bright lights. Whether it's Eleanor Sturko or Harman, or whether it's Peter Millibar, there are a few of those MLAs that have really been sounding the alarm bell and making some waves and making some headway on these issues. One of the ones that I wish was a little bit louder was our health critic, because honestly, it's she's been pretty quiet when it comes to what's been going on with Interior Health. We saw yesterday, Island Health is going through some layoffs, etc. on the executive side. So it'll be really interesting to see how the rest of the health authorities are faring. But certainly, I'd love to see some noise from the health critic herself.
We've done tons of story on forestry here in British Columbia and wildfires, but there was a letter sent by U.S. Congressman Tom Tiffany, wrote a letter to Canada saying that, well, we know a key driver of this issue has been lack of active forest management. We've also seen things like arson and other multiple fires, but they're saying that Canada lacks management of forests and they're tired of the smoke.
They're right. Tiffany is right. Ian, you're smiling. You should say something.
Well, it's coming from the wrong audience, really. It's coming from the wrong person, I think. The Americans are not the ones to deliver that message, I think. But the thing is, all kinds of international organizations have said similar, especially about, when it's looked at in terms of emissions. It accounts for an enormous proportion of Canada's emissions. But then the problem is, we talk about circular arguments, although I don't know if I accused EB of that, though he is guilty of that. But it seems it's a bit of a circular argument because you talk about emissions from forest fires and then emissions are blamed for forest fires. There doesn't seem to be much of an inclination among certain people to consider the fact that maybe the forests are mismanaged. And that's, from what I gather anyway, that seems to be something that goes back about 50 years, this argument. It just keeps going and it never seems to be solved. We don't seem to get anywhere. But my feeling is, and Jim knows far more about this than probably either of us, I think technology will probably be the thing that saves us in the end, because when I look at a lot of this new drone technology and remote technology, I think it's going to become so much easier to manage that it'll probably just that's how it'll be solved, rather than politically, as is often the case. Technology is what kind of really changes things rather than politics.
I think politics have gotten in the way of this, and we look at the Jasper fire and how they ignored the calls to clean that up, that pine beetle kill, and they ignored it. Stephen Guilbeault was the environment minister at the time. They tried to step to the podium and blame it on climate change, but then they were kind of called out on it and said that this is forest mismanagement. And that's the thing. They've been doing this, and I've done tons of stories here in British Columbia on the same type of thing, where, like a lot of the lumber companies here in British Columbia say that it's just, you can't operate in British Columbia because there's no certainty, and the forest is mismanaged here in British Columbia. And they did this committee here thing, and even when I interviewed David Eby, they got a committee they put together, a whole bunch of stakeholders, and guess who said that there's not enough representation from industry on it. And so how are you going to expect industry to get back involved if you don't even allow them to be represented proportionally on the committee?
Yeah, I'll disagree a little bit with Ian. I think that, having a congressperson is actually a good voice. I can guarantee you that, Congressman Tiffany is not writing a letter because, one day he was on his back deck and decided to, pen a letter. It's because he's getting inundated with comments and letters and concerns from his own constituents. And this is probably a show of, of some form of political will to his constituents, to his own audience. So is he actually talking to Canadians? No. I think he's talking to, his own constituents and saying, yeah, Canada, clean up your act. The reality is Canada does need to clean up its act. We do a horrible job of managing our forests. We do a horrible job of actually controlling our forest fires. And it hasn't always been this way. We do, and I will agree with Ian, that we have one atmosphere that does affect everyone. But unfortunately, our forest fires do not count in our emissions calculations. They do not have to be counted by our governments. And I think that is a huge blunder because, in our forest fire seasons, we'll burn more emissions than 4 or 5 times all of BC's emissions every single year. So we are cutting off our noses to spite our faces. And if we really wanted to lower our emissions over the past 7 years, what we should have done is just fight fires. If we fought our fires, we'd have banked, 15 years worth of emissions that we could actually, credit ourselves against. But unfortunately, that's not how the Paris Accord actually calculates our emissions. And so we're not able to take those and credit ourselves with fighting fires. But I hope, Ian, that you're correct on the innovation and technology. I see California making some really, really great moves. California, Nevada, Arizona, and Oregon have signed that accord with their basic fire SWAT team. That's this hyper trained SWAT team that goes in when a fire is detected. Right at the front line, they have almost $4 billion of machinery at their disposal, and they can, literally hit a fire within seconds. Now, it still doesn't put out, fires like Pacific Palisades. And when I was in California last visiting family, I actually took a look at that fire site. Horrible devastation. So it won't cure all of them, but it certainly is better than what we have right now. Our mandate is to let fires burn. We do not have the capacity, nor do we have the political will right now to fight fires. The only fires that we fight are ones that are interface fires, where they actually have, they could affect cities or towns or people. So I don't think that's a great management of our forests. On any given fire year, we will, burn basically 4 times the allowable cut block. So again, why bother? Why bother with even, cutting if all we're going to do is just let it burn?
Yeah, if you look at Finland as compared to Canada here, they actively manage their forests. Their forests are around 100 years old because of active management and good forestry practices. They have very few fires. And what you're talking about, initial attack is the most important thing when it comes to fire. Either you put it out right away, or you hope for, and you got to get in front of it and put a brake in. You got to remove the fuel. And we were lucky out here by the Kelowna airport. That one was put out right away. And that's where it comes into the equipment, like you're talking about, these SWAT attacks and stuff like that. And the sad thing in British Columbia, though, is we interviewed one of the executives for Coulson Aviation, one of the largest airborne wildfire fighting companies in the world. And they got a contract finally this year for their helicopter, Sikorsky helicopter. But for years, they couldn't even get a contract with British Columbia. So they were fighting wildfires in Oregon and Australia and Washington and different places, but not here actively at home. And they're obviously famously known for the Mars bomber that came here in 2003, was billed as a hero. And they think that was part of the problem, that the Mars bomber got all the attention so that the BC government didn't want to really ever use them again.
Yeah, it's a huge blunder by the government, and that SWAT team that I just mentioned, they actually use quite a bit of Coulson's equipment, and so what they don't buy themselves, they actually use from the Coulsons and have deployed there. So I think you're right, and you're absolutely correct. If you don't hit it right away, they turn into much larger monsters. And talking with some of the fire crews and higher ups and in BC wildfire, over on our west side fire, that was actually the size of a football field when it first was detected and could have been easily put out. But instead they thought, well, we'll let it burn for a while, not realizing the wind shift would take it over the crest of the mountain there and literally, end up burning over 300 homes. So, definitely we need to start hitting these right away. We see how effective it is when we do hit them right away, and how much less it costs us in the long run to actually, do the work of that firefighting. But if we allowed our forestry companies to manage our forests in a better way, we could do much, much better. And in talking with some of the Indigenous nations and how they're very critical of how we manage our forests, but they're also very critical of how little we actually take out of our forests and how little prescribed burning in the fall that we do as well.
More good news. I interviewed a company here, an innovative company that is creating, I think it's called Fireswarm, if my memory serves me correctly. And they're also a Vancouver Island company that has created these drones, these unmanned drones that are still remote control operated. But the cool thing about those things is they can operate 24/7. So lots of times when these fires start at night, it's ground crews that are fighting them, and we don't use any aerial attack. And aerial attack is clearly one of the better ways to get at a fire. So if you have these swarms of drones that can actually work 24/7, that would be a game changer as well. And they've got approval by Transport Canada to start flying these things, and they did a demonstration here in Kelowna just recently.
Yeah, and Coulson, they have helicopters with night vision as well that have not been utilized in BC. And a lot of BC wildfire says, the fires are usually most dormant at night, so it's a great time to hit them. It's harder to hit them during the daytime when they're most active and burning hotter. So, the fact that these drones could also be deployed, I think, is brilliant. And hopefully we make some headway there.
We're gonna play that. We're gonna move on. We're gonna play this clip here on housing in Canada here, and I'm sure this one is gonna resonate with you. Let's play this clip. I don't know if you have this. Can you play this clip here? If you look at the document where I'm at here, we played it earlier this morning here. Now we're going to try and play this clip anyway. We've talked a lot about this, Renee, about how so many of the things in British Columbia and Canada are related to permits, fees, DCCs, and I think there was, Ravi Kahlon did announce that they are going to, I think it was your idea. We talked about it, I don't know how long ago, 6 months ago, 8 months ago, and about how you maybe pay the DCCs at the end as opposed to paying them up front. And I think they put in something into place where 25% of the DCCs now and 75% on occupancy.
Yeah, and I will give credit to the NDP government for that move. That was a positive. We calculated it for one of our projects, for one of our rental projects, and it basically is about $1 million in saved interest costs. That's a significant amount. And it's an amount that allows you to really get your project up and running in quicker order. So it definitely will lower the cost of housing. But I wish that was the only, the only cost the government puts onto projects, and it just simply is not the case. You look at the average house price, and it's about 30. Some estimates will say 30%. Some will say as high as 37%. I just read a statistic this morning. Of the cost of that particular home is just government costs, levies, CACs, DCCs, and property taxes. And it's interesting. There was a company actually that took the city of Langley to court over the community amenity charges, and West Kelowna has had community amenity charges on its docket for consideration. I've talked to most of the city councillors and the mayor about that and said, do not do that. It'll be a nail in a coffin for developers wanting to go to West Kelowna. But it's certainly they took the city of Langley to court, and the court found in the developer's favor. So this is where I've yet to really digest all of the legal implications of that particular decision, but and most likely it will be appealed because it signals a real shift or change for CACs. But these costs. We have a saying here at Troika that basically is, and we wonder why the cost of housing is so expensive. We don't wonder. We know how much bureaucracy has been layered on. Just recently, now we're being required fire letters for when a project is under construction. And so we're having to do, more mitigation for every single project. Before we're actually under construction. These are huge costs, and they all add to the price of housing. And for the end user, it makes it less and less affordable. Recently talking with Anne McMillan, she out of the Urban Development Institute in Vancouver, she'll say it's, the housing model's broken, and until, government gets out of the way, it's really going to take a lot to fix.
We're just going to play that small clip here. I don't know if it got sound there. Okay, you can let it go. Forget it. We won't play it today. You got no sound. That's not going to work today, but basically he's repeating what you just said. And he says government needs to get out of the way. The builders can do their job. And I mean, one of the key points you made there, $1 million in savings, just like that, just on paying the DCCs at the end. I mean, those are costs that are passed through. People don't realize that the developer has to pass those costs through. There's no your margins are already fairly thin. It's not like, that's all sticking with you, right? So that all ends up in the price of the home. And then there's tax on top of that.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's there's huge amounts of costs that government has added. There's the consideration for going with Step Code 5. When I was in government and serving as the environment critic, I actually got Minister Heyman to admit on Hansard, so on record, that the cost from going to Step Code 3 to Step Code 5 is going to be between 10 and 12% added cost to housing. So you take our housing numbers today and you just add 10 to 12% payment on that, and the payback period of that is about 27 years. So it's not a savings to the end user, and really it's adding insult to injury on a housing industry that really is not very high in the admissions list. He also admitted that that going from step code 3 to step code 5 was only going to result in 0.5 of a megaton of savings of emissions. So it's a drop in the bucket of savings of emissions, while the cost is exorbitant and paid for by the taxpayers of BC.
Before we leave British Columbia here, we have this other tweet here from Rob Shaw on this really sad story of this 10-year-old girl here, Charlene Pollock, and then the BC NDP not paying for the medication here for this dying 10-year-old girl. Any thoughts on, have you seen that story?
Absolutely. This is atrocious. It is devastating. It's unthinkable. The media out on the island have actually done a really good job of pulling from some experts and expert witnesses that have gone on record saying, this is not a decision for government to make. This is a decision for the practitioners that are surrounding this young girl to make. For government to play God like this. But this signals something much larger. And I hope that the public is paying attention, because I wish this was a one-off. I advocated for, patients of cystic fibrosis when I was a health critic, to actually get life-saving medication, in which the government said that they had to be at 18% lung capacity before they could actually get approval for this particular drug. This drug was a game changer. It basically allowed, from teenage years on, a cystic fibrosis patient to live a normal life. To have government again playing God with how it was administered is really, really almost bordering immoral. But it is how our healthcare system is administered today. Great book, Dr. Brian Day. I know I mentioned it last week. I'm only halfway through, so I can't say the ending is as great as the beginning. But the stats and statistics that he is using, the testimony that was given under oath during 16 years of court cases, are absolutely damning for the BC government and for the Canadian government and how they administer our healthcare system, in which basically he proves, and the judge states in the decision, that people die on wait lists because of government decisions. And people die because government decides to, whether or not to fund particular drugs. And this case on the island is case in point with this 10-year-old girl. Absolutely tragic.
Yeah, and we're going to move on to international politics here. And we're going to talk about Mark Carney has asked his cabinet to find some cuts, but then CBC was saying, well, they're trying to find the cuts. They're not actually going to cut right away, but they're asking them to find 7.5% in 2026, 10 in 27, and 15 in 2028. And a lot of pushback on this already. And of course, the NDP, really pushing back on. But I guess who is the NDP now anyway? In the federal NDP. But anyway, so this is, they're supposed to find some money to cut. But CBC went on to say, well, they're supposed to just find it. But what does that even mean? Just find it. We're not necessarily cutting it. What would be the purpose of finding it?
Well, my biggest question when this came to light is, well, are they not? I mean, they should be already editing a budget. The budget should be done if they're going to present it in September. So what are they actually doing? And I mean, it's pretty scary to then say, how have they been operating so far, and how are they spending money, and who's the governor on how that money is spent? Is it just the finance minister? That's pretty scary. Is it just the treasury? So I think that there are bigger questions to be asked here. I think they're in trouble. I think that this is a fiscal and a financial mess, and one that needs to be cleaned up. Or the Canadian public will just try to get another vote in.
I'll let Ian lead up to the next story because we're on holidays. And why are we on holidays, Ian?
Why indeed? I mean, why bother working? I suppose because they've got the golden ticket, haven't they? A lot of these people. I just quickly wanted to say something though about the budget or the fiscal position that Canada's in. They're talking about all these cuts. One of the biggest expenses every year is debt, is interest payments. And you would think financial wizard and mastermind Mark Carney would be very well aware of that and would try to bring the debt down, but instead he's doing the exact opposite while telling, all these random departments that they need to find 7 to 15% savings or whatever. I just find that a little bit curious. And also he's put his foot in his mouth. I think you have to say when he was asked about where's this money going to come from for defense, what the sacrifice is going to be. And he just said, no sacrifices, and just kind of mumbled something incoherent as he tends to do. I just think, he's not really living up to his reputation as a financial genius. And probably that's why they're doing this, because they can get away with it, because he has that reputation that precedes him. Whereas if it was someone else, maybe they'd be under a bit more fire. But as for Carney's hollybobs, anyway, I think that is a good transition, isn't it? Actually, because not only is Canada in potentially in a kind of fiscal crisis. Once upon a time, the level of debt that Canada has and the amount of money that is wasted. I don't know how else to say this in a neutral way. The amount of waste, the amount of failures in expenditure, and the deficit as well, which just keeps on piling up the debt. You'd think that would be a crisis. Usually, historically, maybe it would be, but not now for some reason. But we've got that. We've got the US. We've been told that we're going to be conquered and invaded by Mark Carney, who just won an election, just won a mandate based on that premise, his favorite word, premise. We still don't have a deal with the US. We've got Russia all over the place, China, nuclear weapons, global warming. Everything's going wrong. Everything's going to explode. Not necessarily the sort of time to go on a holiday, I wouldn't think. But this is what I said to Jim earlier is he says one thing and then he does another. I mean, I would go by his actions, and his actions tell me that there is no crisis. There is no emergency. Relax. It's fine. Canada's fine. Because the boss man is telling you that. Because he's off on his holidays, sent all of his MPs and ministers off to go and have holidays until the middle of September. That's when Parliament comes back. There is no crisis. Mark Carney's telling us things are okay. So I'm going to relax.
Don't you give everybody a holiday from June 20th to mid-September, Renee?
No, I do not, and I don't want anyone to get any ideas. Honestly, this Parliament has worked the least that I think it was the statistic was they've worked the least number of days since 1940 something, and even during the war, they were still called back to come and make decisions. So this is ridiculous, and for him to take a break, we don't have a deal with Trump yet. Trump just layered on another 50% of tariffs to our copper, which 50% of the export of copper is actually from BC. BC better be watching its P's and Q's, because we don't have a lot of margin for any downturn in any of the industries that are still moving forward, i.e. mining. So I think this is a huge blunder and very Trudeau-esque. Trudeau is always taking the most inopportune vacations and very public vacations. So hopefully Carney goes somewhere private and doesn't try and visit the Aga Khan or go to Tofino. But honestly, I think this is a huge blunder. I can't imagine why the man would need a vacation already. He's barely been in office, and he hasn't done the same level of travel that we've seen other prime ministers do. But Ian, to your point, an earlier point about his financial genius, the one thing about economists is that they're hindsight people. They're looking in the rear view mirror and reading stats and statistics, oftentimes in the rear view. And the economists that I know really well, and I know some of the big five financial institution economists. And, they're the first ones to say, our predictions are about 50% correct. We never really know what's going to happen. We're kind of like, the weather, meteorologists, we're kind of 50% right. And they don't run businesses. They don't run budgets that are of the size and scale as a country is. And that's my greatest fear is that the one thing that Harper did was he ran the country with incredible ease, but so did Chrétien, who was not an economist but more of a business person. I mean, he was a lawyer by trade, but much more of had business savvy acumen on with him. And he had Paul Martin, which by his side, who was truly a businessman. So that is a huge weakness, and I don't see himself surrounding, Carney see himself surrounding himself with a lot of business people. So his energy minister is maybe the only one that I would have a tremendous amount of confidence in right now. So I have some big fears about whether or not he can right the ship economically for us. And I mean, right now he's our biggest hope. That's all we've got to go on.
Well, he's creating a vacuum there, though, because him and his MPs have gone on hiatus there. Meanwhile, Danielle Smith and Doug Ford are doing the heavy lifting for Canada here. So they struck a couple of deals with a couple of MOUs, and one big one is there's a pipeline that's going to get built between Alberta and Ontario, and hopefully to the water, so that they can get some of that heavy oil out into the European markets and that.
I mean, I have to give her huge props, man. She stays on message. She knows what she is about. She knows her points. And for Doug Ford to be jumping onto that bandwagon, I think is a signal that she has hit the Canadian sentiment accurately. I noticed that in her press conference, or their press conference, I should say, she acknowledged that. She said that, it's the vast majority of Canadians that want pipelines. She's right. She's right about that. And so I think that Doug Ford is saying, like, hey, look, even my province, the vast majority of Ontarians want pipelines and want this kind of economic generator moving forward. So I think she's bang on. She's been on track and on mantra. And the only thing I would have changed about their press conference is I would not have done that press conference in the cowboy hat. I was having a hard time getting over that to some extent. Although Doug Ford was also in his cowboy attire, but I grew up with a grandfather who did not like posers, so he was a true cowboy and knew when someone was pretending, and it just looked like very awkward and in costume. But that would be my only criticism of their press conference. Otherwise, I think Doug Ford was very scathing towards the Trudeau government and very positive towards what Danielle Smith is trying to bring across the finish line.
We got to give props to Danielle Smith, though. She knows how to flip a pancake, and Justin Trudeau failed at it, and so did Mark Carney.
How can you be that bad? Like, the other thing,
too cocky, wasn't he?
Yeah, totally. It's his ego got the best of him. I was also really, watching his entrance into the Stampede. Wow, that was a lot of booze there. And I'm not alcohol booze, but like, booze as in negative. I was, wow, he's not loved in Alberta. I saw that one TikTok where they juxtaposed, Carney's introduction into the Stampede with Pierre Poilievre's into, I think it looked like Cowboys or somewhere that, he was coming to be greeted into the Stampede. And it was certainly very, very different acknowledgement. So, I think Carney has some work to do. And I know that he, in the polls last week, he's still ahead of the Conservatives, but not by a lot. So I don't really see that. I don't really see that continuing if he continues on the fronts that he's on.
Just on the pancake thing there, Mark Carney actually had a consultant next to him that says, oh, they're ready to flip now. And I could see from where I was, don't flip those pancakes because it's going to be a disaster. So that's a typical Liberal thing too, counting on consultants instead of using your own eyes to check it yourself. But yeah, Danielle Smith and Pierre Poilievre flipping pancakes. And I guess good Alberta people know how to flip a good pancake. Flapjacks. Danielle Smith was actually throwing them behind her and landing them in bins and stuff like that. So she's a master of the pancake, but also a master of the deal. We have to give Danielle Smith credit. She's been on point. That's what she campaigned on. She wants to actually deliver for Albertans, Alberta first. And she's got it. We talked earlier before we went on that Alberta has a surplus, a huge surplus as well in their budget, and British Columbia is deep in the red.
Yeah, and I back to Ian's point earlier, watch what they do and watch what their results are, and judge them accordingly. And I think that is key. Danielle has been on point. She knows what her province needs, and she is delivering for her province. She is delivering results. She's delivering less tariffs. She's delivering, a surplus that they can reinvest and reinvest wisely. Their healthcare system is in better stead than ours is. Kai just came out with the statistics last week, and Alberta's wait lists are way less than BC's. BC is one of the worst in the country. So, to go from the best to the worst under this NDP government, that's not positive. And to go from from a surplus budget to one of the worst deficits per capita is not great. So I do think that, if we gauge her by her words, she's on point. But if we gauge her by her results, she's also delivering great results for the Albertans.
The second MOU that they talked about was Alberta's commitment to made in Canada vehicles. And they're the ones, both Doug Ford and Danielle Smith, promoting the end of the EV mandate and promoting access and buying Canadian cars from the auto manufacturing. If the Liberals don't drop that EV mandate, I don't know if there'll be an automobile sector left in Canada to protect.
And Jim, when I was in environment on the Environment Critic, I debated this bill against Josie Osborne in the Legislative Assembly, and I gave these statistics. I said you cannot mandate this, and Jim, you and I both drive electric vehicles, so it's certainly not something that we would disagree with. But to mandate it is absolutely wrong. And it's putting us at a disadvantage. It's increasing the cost of living for Canadians. It's increasing the cost of living for British Columbians. But even if the Canadian mandate goes, the BC mandate is still there. And that's one that has to be eliminated. And I hope, beyond hope, that they eliminate it. But they're going to have to bring the Legislative Assembly back in order to eliminate that, because that comes into effect in 2026. And it's legislated. It's not in regulation. It's actually in legislation. So that would have to be a repeal of that particular bill. And I don't know if this NDP government has the chutzpah to actually do that.
Well, Honda Canada there delayed their EV plant actually, because they said they needed more time. And that's the one that got tons of corporate welfare, billions of dollars from the feds and the province. And now today they came out and said they're going to focus on gasoline cars and hybrids. So again, another thing against the auto manufacturer, the EV mandate. And then the Dealers Association met with Mark Carney as well and said they need to drop this EV mandate. And we're seeing tons and tons of pressure on it. So I just don't know how they're going to keep it. The only thing that I found missing in the Danielle Smith-Doug Ford meeting that I thought should have been there is Scott Moe. Like, I'm not sure why Scott Moe he's the guy in the middle. He's the Oreo, the filling, right? So like they got to go through. I'm sure Scott Moe's all in on getting a pipeline there because I'm sure he'd like to put some Saskatchewan oil and gas through that pipeline as well.
I was going to say, that I think that they know that Scott Moe is on that side already, but maybe he's on vacation.
Yeah. It's the wild, wild west getting it done, though, right? So, and including Ontario, though. But Danielle Smith has been very true to her words the whole time. You got to give her credit for that. And, she's getting Doug Ford on her side. Johnny on the spot, I like to call Doug Ford because he seems to try to hitch his wagon to whoever's leading in a poll or something like that. So there's Doug Ford. He's a conservative one day, a liberal the next day. He is whoever he needs to be, I guess, right?
He is a polling thermometer for sure. Yeah,
it does well for him.
And I think Ian said he looks like a sheriff standing there. He looks like he could work in any Kentucky or Alabama or something as the sheriff.
Yeah, absolutely.
Any other closing thoughts, Ian or Renee, on anything here?
Well, I was going to say
Trump madness, I suppose. That's always a good note to leave it on, isn't it? Trump is coming out with more mad pronouncements. Something about pharmaceuticals now, tariffs. The adventure just continues forever.
Yeah, pharmaceuticals 200% tariff, I think it was. But honestly, trying to get the drug companies to behave, I think, is a good thing. I think that if he's successful in that, I would be very happy to see some of the cost of our drugs go down. You go to other places like Europe, and you go into their pharmacies and see what they're being charged, or it's pretty telling. Just how much the over expenses in North America. But having said that, I would end on this note. Trudeau left a big void federally on in leadership, and Danielle Smith filled that void. And we talked a lot, but in the period of time moving up to the election, just about how much space she was taking up, and how loud her voice became. I think she's still doing it. She says that, she holds a press conference and says polling numbers say that, vast majority of Canadians are want pipelines. And so we're going to announce this pipeline today. And Carney is playing catch up. Carney then is saying, of course, we're going to have pipelines, and it's like, no, not of course. Like, you flip-flopped on this times. So, I think that, again, I think it's going to be really interesting to see, how much leadership Carney actually has, and whether or not he too kind of follows whatever Danielle Smith says, and how her leadership progresses. So very interesting.
Danielle Smith reminds me of John Wayne. Get up, we're burning daylight. And then I think if we on one end of the spectrum, we have Captain Chaos, Donald Trump, that is like got Energizer Bunny batteries in it. I don't know what he does. He does a million things in one day, but a lot of them are chaotic. And then you have Mark Carney's Liberals that are on holiday, that are just like, like the slackers on the farm. And then you have Danielle Smith right down the middle getting things done, right?
Yeah. Country Club Carney.
Yeah, Country Club Carney. And Captain Chaos. We got Country Club Carney and Captain Chaos at the end of the stick. And we got...
Get it done,
right
Danielle.
in the middle of the country, we got a couple of provinces getting things done, and let's count Scott Moe in there as well. Also, Manitoba, it sounds like they're also really pro-business at getting things done. He's done a really good job as well, I think. Well,
and you know what, we're talking about these 5 provinces, whether it's BC, Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, or Ontario. And outside of Manitoba, Ontario is, these 4 provinces have been hit really hard with tariffs, whether it's the manufacturing industry, whether it's the steel industry, whether it's the, energy sector, whether it's potash, whether it's, the legumes to China, and, grains to China. We're talking and now copper in BC. So, we're talking about a lot of tariff hit. Whereas the other provinces haven't experienced that to the same extent. So, good on them for getting together and kind of, band of brothers and sister and trying to get something done.
There you go. And then one of the comments there is the only void Trudeau left was massive corruption. But one of the bright spots that I think that we can look forward to, even in this minority government, is the committees. And we talked about that. And I think that's a key point. If you could just explain that again to Canadians, how important that committee is, as opposed to what we had in the last 10 years.
Well, parliamentary committees have a tremendous amount of power. It's actually what shut down the Trudeau government in the last go, is that they were demanding certain documents that were within the right of the committee to demand, and the speaker found that and argued in their favor, despite being for the Trudeau government, and it literally shut down Parliament. And force them to prorogue and then force them to an election. The same is true about these committees. These committees have a tremendous amount of power. They have subpoena power, and you cannot deny the subpoena. That's how we got the ArriveCan app information, and we know how much corruption there was because those committees subpoenaed those individuals to appear before them. So it's going to be really interesting. I'm super proud of Dan Albus. I mean, what a great advocate for his constituents, of which I am one. But for him to bring this forward and to actually get an inquiry through committee is going to be very, very telling. And I'm very excited to see what they accomplish through this time frame. And it will be available to all Canadians because those are public documents and public processes.
Yeah, and one of the things, the NDP not having official party status has no representation in committee and therefore cannot backstop the Liberals. So it is the Conservatives, the Bloc, and the Liberals in committee now. So, like when Dan said that he just needed to get one Liberal or one Conservative in the Transport Committee to agree with him, and then that way they could have that inquiry. So I think we can look forward to many more of these committees actually going forward, the inquiries, so as opposed to what happened the last 10 years.
Absolutely. I think this is going to be great and really one to watch.
Anything else, Ian?
No, I think we've covered the whole universe there.
There you go. And then let's go. I guess I'd get you back to seeing what Captain Chaos is up to. Because you don't have to look and see,
try and digest it.
You don't have to look and see what Country Club Carney's up to because it's not a lot right now. Because Tim Hodgson says he's not even going to reveal anything. He's just saying, he doesn't talk to the press or whatever. He has press conferences, but he won't reveal anything. So there's that. And then, whereas Captain Chaos meets with the press every 15 minutes, I think, and doles out a new decree.
I think that there was recently a statistic that said that President Trump, in his first 6 months of office, had performed more time in front of the media than any other president in history.
And I would say in his first week, he did more than Joe Biden did in his 4-year term.
That was intentional.
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
Yeah, you can't put a president who can't put two sentences together in front of
I think
me.
he probably does more than a day than Joe Biden did. You never saw him at the podium, really, right? Or take questions, for sure. Anyway, again, thank you, Renee. Another great show, and we'll see you next week. Lots going on in Canada, even though some of our MPs are on vacation. There's the world goes on.
The world goes on, indeed. Yeah,
All
thanks so
right.
much.
All right, cheers, and we'll see you next week. Thanks for watching Now.
We don't just report the news. We live here too. We're your neighbors, bringing you stories that matter to all.